upset. "We will need to interview her," Gillard said, taking down the woman's details. Morag guided them into a meeting room. "I understand that you are also the Human Resources Manager." "Yes." "Are you aware of any threats, incidents, sackings or confrontations within the company which might have led to someone attacking Mrs. Roy?" She nodded and opened a box file in front of her. "After your email, I looked through all of the dismissals we have had in the last 3 years. I have to say there have been scores amongst the temporary staff, principally those who work in the packing hall. The work is fairly casual and we use an agency. I can't say there have never been angry scenes, but I think if any of them were upset, it would more likely to be with me. I do the firing." "What about the more senior staff?" "Mrs. Roy got through a few PAs over the years, but Philippa has been with us for 15 months. We have had 2 industrial tribunal cases, both of which were settled. They are, of course, subject to confidentiality agreements." She moved the box file to her left, away from the detectives. "We'll need to see those," Gillard said, pointing at the box. "I'll have to get Harry's permission," she said. "He's on compassionate leave today, too, so I'll not disturb him." "You don't need to get his permission. You can simply say that the police insisted." Morag locked gazes with Gillard, her jaw set. Finally, she shrugged and slid the box across in front of her. They were interrupted by the arrival of the lassie, which was as delicious as they had hoped. Morag left them for a moment to make some phone calls. "Sounds like she has a point," Claire said. "Mrs. Roy sounds too remote from day-to-day staff management to be the target of a disgruntled employee." "Maybe," Gillard responded. He started flicking through an Indian celebrity magazine which had a sticky note referring to page 73. There he saw a photograph of Harry looking very dapper in a white dinner jacket and lime green bow tie. He was grinning like a loon, as well he might, as he was standing with a dark-haired beauty identified in the caption as Bollywood influencer and health campaigner Sonali Desai. In another picture, Harry emerged from a taxi with another glamorous woman. There was a breathless caption beneath. "This dashing fellow is the heir to 1,000 crore rupee fortune and quite the most eligible Gujarati businessman in town. His name has been linked to both Zarina Kapoor, above, and Anushka Singh, but has recently been seen in the company of Sonali Desai. The question is, which lucky lady will finally nab him?" "How much is 1,000 crore?" Gillard asked. Claire shrugged, but the receptionist said, "A crore is 10 million. The detective prodded at the calculator on his smartphone. "I think the answer is lots." "Quite the ladies' man," Claire said as she flicked through another magazine a couple of years old, and again found a well-thumbed article about Harry. This time it was about his charitable work, which involved sport for disabled people, and a photograph showed him in cricketing whites at the crease, bat ready, while a wheelchair-bound youngster bowled a ball at him. Once Morag returned, she led them off for a tour of the facility. The 2-story office complex led straight onto a large factory. There were many white-coated staff, some of whom stared at the guests as they were led up a flight of stairs and along a metal walkway which ran at head height above the conveyors and packing machines. She took them to the newest line, one making naan breads. She talked enthusiastically about the 200 breads a minute that they could stamp out, baked in 55 seconds under an overhead oven, and the spiral coolers to bring the cooked breads down to a suitable temperature for vacuum packing. It was only here that the detective saw predominantly male staff wearing ear defenders against the racket of the machines. Gillard paid little attention to what she was saying, instead trying to gauge how intensively worked the primarily Asian staff were. Was this a happy family or a sweatshop? There was no obvious evidence either way. "Except for the packing lines, most of our production staff have been with us for years. Grandmothers, mothers and daughters. Our samosa makers in Red Hill, very skilled with their hands, are particularly precious to us. No machine can manage to turn and fold so neatly and so quickly as these ladies." How well do you know the family? Gillard asked, raising his voice above the machinery. Very well. I've worked here for over a decade, working my way up from being a temporary production worker. I went to university with Harry and we have remained good friends ever since. I have to say he's devastated about this. I suggested he should take the whole week off, but then there are things that only he can do. Is that because of the auditors? Gillard asked. Yes, though I think they won't be starting now until next week. She led them on out of the packing hall and towards her office. What about Mrs. Roy herself? Did you like her? Claire asked. She was my boss, and she could be very demanding. I respected her, and I could see what a terrific job she was doing, but we weren't close. I don't think she confided in many people. Morag showed them into the blessed quiet of her own office and then asked a question which seemed to matter to her. Are you planning to interview Harry's sisters, Prisha and Chiara? Yes, Gillard said. Morag nodded. They used to be quite suspicious of me. I dated Harry for a while, and they thought I had ambitions to somehow get control of the company through him. They have much smaller stakes in the shares, don't they? Claire said. She nodded. It's the old Indian custom of everything for the boys, unfortunately. But Mrs. Roy would never have let me marry her son anyway. I knew that early. Why on earth not? Claire interjected. Morag smiled. Well, as Prisha once famously said to her mother, you cannot allow him to marry that money-grabbing Scottish harlot. Charming, Claire said, eyeing Gillard to see his reaction. If the ownership structure had been fairer, there wouldn't have been so much jealousy, I suppose, Gillard said. Don't get me wrong, Morag said. I love Harry dearly and he is wonderful company, but I enjoy my independence. He's always been a bit, well, helpless. I told him long ago that whoever he married would end up clearing up after him for a lifetime. I don't think his sisters, particularly Prisha, ever quite understood my outlook. For me, it's not just about the right marriage, whether it's chosen or arranged. From my perspective, I don't have to marry anyone to be happy. I'm not particularly interested in being rich either. I'm just not ambitious. She laughed. They definitely don't understand that. You're not doing badly for someone with no ambition, Gillard thought. So, would you say there are tensions within the family? He asked. Morag snorted. You could say that. She ushered them out of the office into the reception area where a spread of freshly baked breads and chutneys had been put out for them on antique Indian silverware. This is very kind, Claire said, helping herself to a Peshwari naan and a spoonful of spicy lime pickle. A number of other staff from the office came to join them and were introduced to the two police officers. They included the head of legal services, the receptionist, and the website designer, a young trendy guy with long hair held in a bun. Gillard took a plain roti and a small amount of a fiery dip called Rajasthan Rage. While they were eating, a couple of bottles of sparkling wine were opened. Not while we're on duty, he said. It's alcohol-free, said the website designer. I appreciate that, but it just looks bad for us to be seen doing this while we are investigating the murder, he said. Ah, he said, pointing out two bulging carrier bags. I do hope you will take your gifts. It's just a range of our products, a small appreciation of our faith in you finding out who killed our esteemed leader. Claire, who Gillard knew was an Indian food fanatic, gave him a meaningful look, but he ignored it. I'm sorry, that's very kind, but we can't. We do appreciate the gesture. As they said their goodbyes and left for the car park, Claire said, We could have used the excuse to test a range of the products. Can you imagine if a member of staff snapped a picture of us with glasses of what looks like champagne in hand and then leaving with bulging bags? Okay, you're right, she conceded. Look, if we get off at a reasonable time tonight, we can sneak off to the Ashoka Palace. My shout. So, what did you think of Morag? Gillard stroked his chin. Pretty straightforward and honest. I'm not sure we learned anything. Did you notice that huge engagement ring? I saw she had some rings, he answered. Most of them were costume jewellery. Only one had real gems. Emeralds, she said, and on the engagement finger. Every time we mentioned Harry, her fingers strayed to caress the ring. I think she still likes him much more than she admits. So the fact that he's about to marry someone else might be significant. It is an arranged marriage, Claire said. Mummy picked her out for him. Gillard looked up at Morag Fairburn's grimy first-floor office. She was on the phone, but glanced down at the car from time to time. Interesting. Gillard sat in the carsy comparing notes with Research Intelligence Officer Rob Townsend and DC Carl Hoskins. So, Rob, how are we doing on chasing down the contents of Mrs. Roy's phone? Gillard asked. It's going steadily. She was a busy woman. Out of the 426 separate contacts, we've readily identified half of them who sent emails or texts, mainly work colleagues or people across the industry. We have more difficulty identifying who's behind some of the pay-as-you-go phone numbers. He turned to Hoskins. I rang all 62 of those unknown numbers, Hoskins said. Ignoring those which the family identified, which we assuming to be kosher, I've spoken to 37. I left messages on a further 19, of which all but 4 have been returned. The rest had full message boxes, or in one case the number is no longer obtainable. There's nothing on any of them to suggest anything weird was going on. I mean, the most suspicious was 6 attempted calls in quick succession on the Friday from one unregistered number, which turned out to be her hairdresser wanting to change an appointment at short notice. Mrs. Roy wore a wig, Gillard said. I know, Hoskins replied. But she did have some hair underneath which must have needed dealing with from time to time, don't you think? The 3 male detectives looked at each other in tacit acknowledgement. They had no clue about middle-aged women's hair requirements. I'll ask Claire, Gillard conceded. Rob Townsend said, We've had Harry Roy send out a blanket email across the company and family and friends saying that he's given permission for us to examine all emails and texts received on her phone or other devices, and asked any who have concerns about commercially confidential information to let him know as soon as possible. We've assured him that nothing will go beyond these 4 walls. Well, not necessarily just these 4 particular damp plywood walls, Gillard said, looking at the shadow of black mould just below the extractor fan. I've asked DS Shireen Corey Williams to cast an eye over the work emails. She's got the financial background which will allow her to raise any flags that she comes across. I did look at one set of emails which Harry Roy had drawn to our attention. She had been sent some unwelcome tweets about a year ago at the time of the cook-off competition. They were of a sexual nature, but she apparently didn't report them to the police at the time. According to him, they ceased after about 6 months. I've got a request in with Twitter to trace the origin. Philippa Boswell lived in a large, mock-Tudor detached house in Camberley. A little more grandiose than D.I. Clare Mulholland had expected even for a PA to the boss of a large company. Mrs. Boswell invited the detective into a very luxurious kitchen. She was a tall, handsome woman in her 60s with long, wavy silver hair that managed to look glamorous. She had very blue eyes and fine cheekbones. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I was just so upset, she said. Mrs. Roy was always very good to me, and I am just incredibly shocked at what happened. It was only when she walked across the kitchen to make the detective a coffee that Claire noticed the difficulty Mrs. Boswell had in walking. Was it very demanding, working for her? Yes and no. She was always travelling about, and I sort of acted as a fixed point of contact for her. She had been spending a lot of time in Red Hill in recent months, and she left me to hold the fort, so to speak. She didn't mind that I couldn't physically be with her, given my blasted arthritis. The woman appraised Claire and answered the unspoken question. I used to be the secretary to the chief executive of British Airways 25 years ago, so I know all about pressure and performance. I started out as what they call a trolley dolly on long haul. 2 grown-up kids, 1 husband still, she smiled. Happily married to a retired pilot with a good pension. She gestured to the home around her.
No mortgage, no debts, no drug or gambling habits. No incentive for murder.
Claire couldn't help but laugh.
Thank you for those details. I read a lot of crime fiction. An awful lot. I know how you work. By the way, I've not been able to ride a bicycle for at least a decade.
You're not a suspect, Mrs. Boswell. We just need to know a bit more about her movements.
Well, I emailed her work diary and contact list to your colleague Craig Gillard first thing this morning. I also have a pretty encyclopedic knowledge if the family demands upon her, so I'm happy to help in that direction.
Claire noticed the flicker in the woman's eyes and asked, "One of the more challenging parts of the job?"
I suppose so. Harry wasn't demanding, though he's quite forgetful, so needs a fair amount of managing. I take a leaf out of his mother's book and generally just tell him what to do. He's often out at nightclubs, carousing until the early hours, and then yawns all day. He's a sweet man, but I think he's bored with the job and would prefer to be playing cricket or racing on his speedboat. The daughters are a bit more tricky, particularly the elder one, Prisha. The way she ordered us all about, well, we called her the Maharani.
The what?
Maharani, royalty effectively, female equivalent of a Maharaja.
What about Morag Fairburn? Her eyes narrowed.
Oh, she's a clever one. Efficient, well-organised, ambitious, but nice as pie with it. Boy, she has some kind of hold on Harry.
She was his girlfriend, wasn't she?
More than that. Puppet mistress, you could say. She pulls all his strings. But I have to admit, as operations manager, she's made the whole place more shipshape.
Claire made some notes and then asked, "So, as the amateur sleuth, who wanted Mrs. Roy dead?"
Mrs. Boswell smiled. I'm glad you asked me. It's the same answer, either Prisha or her nasty ex, Deepak. She lifted a finger to her lips. Just between us, understand?
"Tell me about Deepak," Claire said, moving her chair a little closer.
Deepak Tripathi. When he married the daughter years before I was hired, they made him the director of international sourcing, cementing him into the family. I've seen his expense accounts, and he treats the company like his personal piggy bank. Fortunately, he's travelling most of the time, so I rarely run into him. He bursts in here and mouths off in Gujarati at Mrs. Roy, and though I don't understand the actual words, one inevitably does get the gist. When he married Prisha, he basically expected to run the place, and after the death of Dr. Roy, he never quite adjusted to having a female boss. It's annoying he's still here despite the divorce. He made her cry on a couple of occasions.
Mrs. Boswell leaned in closer.
Actually, while I'm spilling the beans, you should know he's a dreadful womanizer. I think one of the reasons Mrs. Roy hired me was because he used to try it on with some of my predecessors. You know the sort. Young, pretty, curvy, no common sense. I'm pretty sure he bedded a couple. He is extremely smooth and darkly handsome in an untrustworthy pick-your-pocket-while-kissing-you kind of way.
Classic baddie in a crime book.
Absolutely. Mrs. Roy sacked my immediate predecessor because she thought she was spying on her for Deepak. I'll never forget the day he came in just after I was appointed. "Who are you and where's Abigail?" he demanded.
Mrs. Boswell's face lit up.
I told him, "I'm the new Abigail, delighted to meet you," and I held out my hand. He stormed out and slammed the door. When I told Mrs. Roy, she was thrilled.
So you were plunged into office politics from day one?
Yes, but when you've spent 10 years flying long haul with drunken business-class Lotharios and sex-mad flight crew, you can handle anything, believe me.
Claire laughed. I take your point. By the way, I tried to get hold of Harry earlier, but he's not answering his phone. I don't suppose you know where he might be.
Ah, Tuesday afternoon. You'll find him down at the cricket ground.
Little Brook Fields cricket ground may have been, as Mrs. Boswell claimed, just around the corner from the main EOS factory, but it wasn't an easy place to find. Access to it squeezed between two 1930s warehouses on a side street off Burnham Lane. There were no fields nearby. Claire had imagined a large circular ground with velvety stripes of pristine grass and gentle applause as men in whites cracked balls to the boundary.
What she found was a rectangular area of weeds netted up for practice in the shadow of a motor components distributor, and behind it a modern but narrow 2-story building. Dozens of cars were parked haphazardly across the frontage. The heraldic shield above the front door, crossed bat and a pair of gloves, confirmed she was at the right place. As she passed through the sliding doors, she heard the echoes of children's voices and saw directly ahead into a gym hall, a dozen wheelchair-bound youngsters throwing basketballs to each other. She made her way along the corridor and into the hall, spotting Harry Roy in a tracksuit with a whistle in his mouth, directing activities. A number of adults, mainly but not exclusively South Asian, stood at the edge of the hall watching their children enjoying themselves. Nearest to her, a young pigtailed girl of around 8 years with thick glasses and a head that jerked continually was motoring in her chair with a basketball in her lap. A large young man in a vest with enormous biceps and thick dark glasses tried to wheel his manual chair to intercept. The girl dodged past and accelerated, reaching another very lanky, ginger-haired girl who plucked the ball from her lap and tossed it to a teammate further down the hall. When the ball was finally deposited into a waist-high net, there was a round of applause from the watching parents and carers, and some rather wobbly high fives on the court. Harry Roy continued to direct operations, sometimes in English, sometimes not, and it was another 20 minutes before the session ended and Claire was able to approach. She watched as parents congratulated Harry and then wheeled their beaming youngsters away to the toilets, changing rooms, and other facilities. Harry recognized Claire and introduced her to some of the parents. "This is D.I. Mulholland, who is working very hard to bring us some justice."
"Poor Mrs. Roy," said one middle-aged Asian woman. "Such a good woman, so generous to the community, as is her wonderful son." She gestured to Harry.
"This is all very commendable," Claire said.
"It's just something I've been doing for a number of years."
"So does Empire of Spice pay for all this? I saw a plaque by the front door."
"Well, the company paid to refurbish the building several years ago. But we have to move, because even this little bit of land is so valuable, being close to the airport. So we found a proper piece of greenery a bit further west. Unfortunately, what we get from selling this won't be enough to fully equip it." He shrugged.
"So what will you do?"
"I've agreed to cover the difference. I think it's important to put something back into the community, don't you?"
Claire nodded in agreement.
"You will have noticed Anita in the motorized chair. She has come out of herself so much in the 3 years we've been running this. At the new place we will have a proper building for physiotherapists, with at least one on site at all times, and we will get a second adapted minibus. It's actually very exciting."
It was the first time that Claire Mulholland had seen him grin, but the smile soon faded, and he scratched his head.
"My mother encouraged my interest in this and would have loved to have seen us move to a better site."
Claire began to explain the reason she had come. "Your mother had received some threats on social media, including some of a sexual nature, since she had begun appearing on TV. We don't seem to have any records of this being reported."
"No, I don't think it ever was," he said. "It's just today's reality, isn't it? Do you think these things could be connected to her death?"
"I'd be in a better position to say if there was some record of them."
Harry nodded.
"I'll get one of our marketing people to forward everything we can find."
He paused for a moment and rubbed his chin.
"You don't need to do anything controversial these days to enrage someone somewhere, do you? Whatever happened to reasonableness?"
Claire watched him go into the changing rooms, then returned to her car to make some notes. She looked up 10 minutes later across the now deserted parking area and saw Harry get into his silver Mercedes. He buckled up and then stared vacantly out of the windscreen. He didn't move for 2 or 3 minutes, then rested his forearms across the steering wheel, his head slumped upon them. His shoulders began to tremble. Businessman Johnny Lamb turned out to be very hard to track down. Shireen had tried ringing several times the day before and had left messages which were not returned. Gillard sat with her at her desk as she again rang Hong Kong and international cuisine, only to be told by his polite but evasive PA that Mr. Lamb was on a flight to Hong Kong. The PA insisted that she had passed on the messages and that Mr. Lamb would call as soon as he had a moment.
"Sorry, boss. That's the best I can do,"
Shireen said as she ended the call. I could have a word with Hong Kong police, but it seems a bit heavy-handed at this stage. Likewise for an arrest warrant on his return, Gillard said. The photographs they had seen online of Lamb showed a dapper and flamboyantly dressed middle-aged man with smiling eyes and a goatee beard. There was even one photograph of him at some soiree with Harry Roy, a beautiful Indian-looking woman standing between them, but not identified on the picture. How did you get on with the Americans? Gillard asked her. Much better. I spoke to the chief press spokesman of Global Foods in Milwaukee, who confirmed the meeting with Mrs. Roy, but was unable to shed any light on what was discussed. She did point out that if Global Foods had been intending to make an offer for her empire of spice, she would have known about it, which doesn't mean that they're ruling it out in the future. She was quite apologetic that under Securities and Exchange Commission rules in the US she couldn't tell me any more. Gillard sighed. I suppose we couldn't expect any better. It was 5 o'clock, and the mobile incident room was packed. Gillard had convened the meeting principally for DS Shireen Corey Williams to present the background to the Empire of Spice. D.I. Mulholland was there along with Detective Constables Colin Hodges and Carl Hoskins, plus Rob Townsend, the Research Intelligence Officer. The PowerPoint presentation Shireen gave was an overview of the foundation of the company and the various business deals that it had made. Her exotic good looks and halo of dark wavy hair always guaranteed attention from male attendees, though she was often teased about her accent. She was a mixture of Iranian and Lebanese stock, and after marrying a Brummie and living in Britain's second city for a decade, she had picked up a little of the nasal Birmingham twang. It was half an hour in before she came to the nub of the question. Who controlled the firm? In most ways, EOS is a conventional company. The shares traded on London's alternative investment market have performed steadily for the last 5 years, with a market value of roughly £120 million. She outlined the family shareholdings. The board and trustees together can thwart any bid, as they have a majority. She displayed the next slide. Those 4 trustees are Mrs. Roy's son Harry, her brother Vikram Raj, Prisha's ex-husband Deepak Tripathi, and L.P. Gosht, a retired judge who lives in India, but who was the cousin of the late Dr. Roy. Vaj is the chair of the trustees and is also the family's lawyer. His secretary's been good enough to forward me a copy of Mrs. Roy's will. Carl Hoskins rubbed his hands together and chuckled. Now we get to know who had a motive. The slide showed a photocopy of the first page of the will. I'll summarise it for you. Mrs. Roy's 5% stake in the company, worth about £6 million, is her main asset and is transferred to the family trust. Likewise, the house at Richmond, which is estimated to be worth over £4 million. That's a lot of money, Hodges said with a grin. I could kill for that.
Yeah, but you're skint, Hoskins said. If you was already loaded like Mrs. Roy's sprogs, could you be bothered? Especially if you knew you'd get it eventually anyway.
Hodges shrugged. Fair point.
What exactly is the trust for? Gillard asked.
Shireen turned to the whiteboard. I had assumed that it was set up purely with the children as beneficiaries, but it's not so simple. The trust deed I found is a translation, and is quite brief. It lays out charitable aims both for Dr. Roy's legacy and the future family business, but it's also part manifesto. Dr. Roy wants to fund Hindu education and expand something called Hindutva, which seems to be something to do with Indian self-determination. The document refers to a schedule of reserved assets and a codicil of beneficiary precedents. There was no copy of the schedule or codicil filed with Companies House. I emailed both Vaj and Harry Roy to ask for it, but have yet to receive a reply. Gillard looked up. Harry's just been diagnosed with depression, so I would just pursue the lawyer, Vaj. Shireen continued. One thing that is obvious about this company is its archaic and paternalistic structure. That's just a polite way of calling it discriminatory, Claire said. Shireen smiled her agreement. Yes, Harry is the second child, but has a huge stake compared to his sisters and even his mother. None of the women were trustees either, yet it was Mrs. Roy's business acumen that built it. Grotesquely unfair, Claire added. Carl Hoskins raised his hand. So what you're saying is she should have done the murdering rather than being murdered? I hadn't thought of it that way, Shireen said. But power battles within the company should be of interest to us, however they play out. Definitely, Gillard said. Shireen continued. What I did discover from reading the minutes of one particular board meeting was that Deepak Tripathi lobbied the other trustees to allow him to retain control of his ex-wife's small stake, even after their divorce came through. The chair of trustees, Vikram Vaj, reminded him that it might not stand up to legal challenge, though he expressed sympathy for his motivation. Claire rolled her eyes. That's appalling. That's one way to characterise it, Gillard said. But it's not simply male domination. The trust was built to enshrine the beliefs and preferences of the late Dr. Roy. He seems to have controlled the company quite effectively from beyond the grave. A little bit of immortality, Claire said. Gillard leaned back on his chair and cupped his hands behind his head. So the upshot is that although this company was run by a woman, and with 2 out of her 3 children being women, its destiny remains entirely in the hands of men, some of whom were only associated with the family through marriage. And a broken marriage at that, Shireen said. I'm surprised that neither of the daughters have challenged the deed in court, Claire said. It's a good point. Perhaps we should ask them, he replied. In fact, I think it might be a good idea to do a little bit more digging into her children's background. Any debts, any bad habits, that kind of thing. At the end of the presentation, Gillard stood up and thanked Shireen for her contribution. The various detectives headed for the exit, glad to escape the bad air and the insistent hum of the heater. Claire Mulholland remained behind, watching him collecting up the papers. I think Deepak Tripathi should be our first priority, she said. I've heard interesting things about his rivalry with Mrs. Roy. I agree. I am looking forward to meeting him. Mrs. Roy's last call on the Friday afternoon before her death was with him. Mrs. Boswell overheard some furious disagreement before she slammed the phone down. Do you know what about? No, it was all in Gujarati. All she said was that soon after, Mrs. Roy left the building with a face like thunder. It was the last time she saw her alive. Let's bring him in, Gillard said. Slight snag. He's in Glasgow until Thursday, so Mrs. Boswell arranged for me to Skype him this evening at his hotel there. Will you join me? Absolutely. Let's see if this slippery fellow has an alibi.
Chapter 6. Their first Skyped glimpse of Deepak Tripathi revealed a smoothly attired businessman wearing a light grey 3-piece suit and a pink tie. The fisheye distorted image could not disguise his saturnine good looks. He had dark eyes, a short, neatly trimmed beard, and a deep, treacly voice. My last call with Mrs. Roy, yes, it was on Friday afternoon, about 5:30 p.m., I think. What was it about? Claire asked. Behind him she could see some anonymous hotel room which, from the background noise, was quite close to the airport. It was a really rather humdrum conversation, just getting our Bombay ducks in a row for the new production line at Red Hill. Mrs. Boswell said she heard raised voices, Gillard said. Deepak laughed gently. No, there were no disagreements, no hysteria. I'm afraid Mrs. Boswell doesn't realize that Gujarati is quite an energetic language. Then, can you explain why Mrs. Roy hung up on you and was then seen to storm off from her desk? She asked. He shrugged. It wasn't an argument. Maybe Philippa got mixed up about which call it was. Gillard and Claire looked at each other. OK, Gillard said. Let's broaden the conversation. Had Mrs. Roy at any stage shared with you any worries or anxieties that she had? You mean personally? No, I don't think she's a great sharer of that type of thing. I'm an ex-son-in-law, not exactly trusted within the family. I suppose that I keep my job only because it is hard to replace the contacts that I have in the subcontinent. However, I am aware that she was far from happy with the slapdash work that Harry did on the finances. I mean, he's horribly underqualified anyway, and there have been problems with the audits on numerous occasions. Are you talking about mistakes or something intentional?
He laughed. No, Harry's certainly honest. But, of course, accounting mistakes can look like fraud. Credit to Mrs. Roy, she may have had her tyrannical moments, but she was a meritocrat. After all, that is how she overcame her own husband's prejudice against women. So while she disapproved of Morag Fairburn as a marriage partner for Harry, she repeatedly promoted her so she could keep an eye on him. Morag is sharp as a needle, diligent and hard-working.
Were there any disagreements within the family, do you know?
Deepak laughed and shook his head. Well, where to begin? There were differences of strategy, jealousies and enmities. The Roy family is full of very headstrong people, and if you're not family, it's a good idea to duck down in your trench from time to time.
So, what are the main issues at the current time?
The same ones they always are. Whether to sell up or expand, and to that end who gets control of the shares. I mean, when you have someone as pushy as my former wife, then you are bound to get clashes, especially when her new boyfriend is always pressing her for money.
Gillard looked down at his notes. That would be Simon Parr Fielding.
The very same. A more idle man you could never wish to meet. I have no idea what she sees in him. He's a gambler and an alcoholic.
Gillard was hardly surprised to discover that Deepak resented the man who replaced him. This was the way of the world. "Who do you think killed Mrs. Roy?" he asked.
My goodness, nobody in the family, fortunately.
"We do have to ask you," Claire said, "where exactly you were early on Sunday morning when Mrs. Roy was killed."
In bed with my girlfriend Victoria at her house.
He gave an address in Surrey. "She would substantiate this, I presume," she continued.
"I certainly hope so," he laughed.
"Did you like Mrs. Roy?" Gillard asked.
"I respected her and everything she had achieved, but it's hard to actually like a woman who fundamentally distrusts you."
"Because of the divorce?" Claire asked.
"Mainly, compounded by the tissue of lies that my ex-wife told about me."
"You expected to head the business after Dr. Roy's death, we understand."
"When I married his daughter, Dr. Roy promised me I would become chief executive, so yes. But in the event I must concede Mrs. Roy did do a splendid job. As I say, I respected her."
"But you didn't like working under her?" Claire asked.
He gave an exasperated sigh. Well, obviously it grated a bit. She was arrogant and obtuse and sometimes got things wrong. But then that can also be said of all of us from time to time, can it not?
The interview over, Deepak Tripathi exhaled mightily, closed down the laptop and rubbed his hands over his face. The blank hotel room, its anodyne off-white bedspread and matching beige walls, seemed to him like a cell. He had lied to Philippa Boswell, and not for the first time. He wasn't in Glasgow, but in the Orion Hotel at Heathrow Airport. He would have preferred to be in Glasgow, as far away from the police as possible, but he had business to conclude here close to London. He walked into the bathroom and rifled through his sponge bag for some tablets to deal with the stress. As he stared at his guilt-ridden face in the mirror, his mobile rang. He looked at the number and nodded to himself. This was a call he had been expecting.
"Hello, darling. No, it wasn't too bad," he said. "They didn't ask anything about that."
He paused.
"Look, I do need you to give me an alibi. Just say I was staying with you on that morning. Until at least 9 o'clock, I would have thought."
He paused again as he listened.
"I'm perfectly aware of that. It just saves complications. I need them off my back for at least the next week. Then we can go away."
He laughed.
"Yes, somewhere like that, with no extradition treaty. Another couple of hours. Yes, back about 9 p.m. I love you too. Bye."
He hung up and stroked his chin, looked at his watch, then at his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he wanted, a mobile number stored under a misleading name. He tapped it and waited for it to dial out. When the call was answered, he said, "Is Xanthia available now?" "Good. 90 minutes, I think. I'm at the Orion Hotel, Heathrow, room 216. Yes, the usual. Stilettos, lingerie, that kind of thing." When prompted, he read out his credit card number. "In half an hour. That's fine." He knew it might be the last time. In future, depending where he ended up, he might have to learn to behave. Claire Mulholland had inherited Gillard's pub fight case from Saturday night. She had charged a young tearaway called Brendan Maguire with affray, drunk and disorderly, and assault, but still had to identify another lad who had been caught on CCTV throwing punches and trying to kick one of those on the floor. The witnesses identified him as a scaffolder just known as Pikey Steve. The victims, Paul Welby and Jason Waddington, who had been on the losing end of this fight, were hardly angels themselves. The CCTV data stick that Gillard had passed to Claire had proved invaluable in unravelling the complicated punch-up that swirled around the pub. "I don't think any of them are going to worry too much about this," she told Gillard as they shared a starter of onion bhaji. "Maguire is pleading guilty and will probably get community service and bound over. He claims that he doesn't know Pikey Steve. I could try and track down every scaffolding firm in the area," she said, "but with the workload I've got, it's hardly worth spending all that time if at the end of it he just gets a smack on the wrist from the magistrates." Gillard nodded. "Always the same. I just feel like he's spending all day rolling a boulder uphill. Still, if we can't prosecute people like him when we've got such good CCTV, what chance have we got when there isn't any clear evidence?" The mood improved as they began the main course, a prawn balti for Claire and a murg masala plus saag bhaji for Gillard. 2 huge, toasty hot Peshwari naans arrived shortly afterwards. "So, any clues about Mrs. Roy's killer?" she asked as she tore a chunk off the bread, releasing a delicious aroma of almond paste and herbs. "Nothing clear yet. The only DNA on her skin was canine, 2 samples, one of which matched her own dog. Elimination samples from Kirsty Mockett and the male dog walker match what we found on her coat. That could be from where they covered her over with a dry cleaning bag. CSI also found a single hair on her lapel that has yielded some unidentified human DNA. Of course, with a coat, depending where it's been hung up, it could be all sorts of hairs. And it could have dropped off the bag too. I've asked Gabby Underwood to get elimination samples from Mrs. Roy's family and close colleagues. There do appear to be glove prints on her coat's shoulder too." "Well, that might dovetail with what we have for the dog," she said. "The vet gave him a good once-over. He had bruise injuries on his head and shoulders consistent with having been struck by the murder weapon, or something similar. She also found a couple of threads of material on his jowls, which conceivably might be fragments of the assailant's trousers, but of course could be from anything he's been rooting in. My biggest hope is for the tests from the murder weapon. I'm expecting them tomorrow." "Any dabs?" she asked. Gillard shook his head. "The fingerprint boys say that the assailant had been wearing fabric gloves, which had obliterated some earlier smears and partial latent prints. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that whoever last used it for its intended purpose has left some sweat there, and we might be able to dig up a bit of DNA from them." 40 miles southeast, Sam Gillard was nearly home. She had just finished a shift in the Surrey Police Control Room where she was a civilian call handler on the emergency line. Brutally stressful, not so much because of the weight of work, though that could be bad, but because of the distressing scenes that were described to her. Serious road accidents, stabbings, and worst of all domestic violence, often caught as it happened. Tears, anguish, pleas for help. Trying to get needed information and call tracing done while keeping witnesses and victims on the line. Now she was reversing her car up the drive and would soon put her feet up in front of the TV. Sadly, no glass of wine at this stage in her pregnancy. Perhaps she'd try that yoga breathing technique again. She unlocked the door and found a parcel on the mat. No stamp or address, just brown paper and string the old-fashioned way. It had just 4 words written on it in marker pen. "For your little one." She unwrapped the parcel and saw a series of hand-knitted baby clothes, a little jacket, booties, and a bonnet. Not pink, nor blue, an ugly twill of dark brown and grey with black ribbon. The enclosed card said, "With warmest wishes from your Auntie Trish." It made her blood run cold. Chapter 7. Wednesday. The DNA test results on the hand weight turned out to be interesting. Gillard opened up the PDF emailed by the lab and speed-read the details. The blood-stained end of the weapon unsurprisingly yielded lots of DNA that matched Mrs. Roy, plus some animal markers which turned out to be dog. Bertie the boxer undoubtedly struck with the same weapon. As Kuroshi had predicted, there was a profusion of previous usage. Unfortunately, the partial prints were either smeared or not anywhere near detailed enough for a proper comparison with the national database. The separate report from the Surrey-Sussex Fingerprint Centre in Lewis had confirmed that. However, those same sweaty prints did yield a tiny trace of so far unidentified human DNA. Gillard wanted more work done on this sample. After speaking to Kuroshi, he requested mitochondrial analysis, a lengthier process involving the maternal line of heredity, and which would give some detailed evidence about the ethnic origin of that person. Though he already knew that none of Mrs. Roy's children had wielded the weapon, there was a much larger extended family of cousins and uncles peripherally connected to the business who had not been DNA tested. Comparing the unknown sample with Mrs. Roy's could provide some pointers not only of direct familial connection, but of common ethnicity. Of course, even if such a match were found, it would not prove that the sample was from the perpetrator. At the very least, it would hint at who had at some stage touched this gym weight and open up a new line of inquiry. He also ordered specialist tests on the fibres of cloth found on Bertie the boxer. After he finished his emails, Gillard went off to the forensic pathologist. Mrs. Roy's body was in the mortuary at East Surrey Hospital in Red Hill. Gillard hadn't arrived in time for the post-mortem, but was able to catch Dr. David Delahaye while he was clearing up. They greeted each other warmly, having crossed paths many times over the years. The Home Office forensic pathologist was a tall, slightly built man with a domed, balding head and metal-framed glasses. He looked like most people's idea of a rocket scientist. Gillard trusted his judgment implicitly. "I'll send you my full report later," Delahaye said. "But the bottom line is that Mrs. Roy died as a result of a dozen or more hefty blows to the head with a metallic instrument. I understand you have found this murder weapon." "Yes, here are the images," he said, sliding out a series of photographic enlargements. "It's an old-fashioned weight, but makes a pretty nasty weapon." Delahaye peered closely at the photos. "Yes, that would appear to fit the bill. Effectively, it is a hammer, and was almost certainly used as one. The cranium was fractured in several places on the left-hand side, which does fit with the idea of the cyclist approaching from behind on the left, and swinging, perhaps outwards with the right hand for the first blow. The lady would almost certainly have fallen after the first blow, and subsequent blows would have to have been administered from either a crouching or kneeling position. But it does seem to fit in with the tyre track evidence and the impression of the tip of the training shoe, which was within 2 meters of where the body was found." Gillard summarized the DNA analysis from the weapon and mentioned the discovery of the bicycle. Delahaye nodded, then said, "I would love to say that this is a straightforward case, but there may be a little bit of complexity in this. Let me show you the body." He walked to one of the stainless steel drawers and pulled it open. He then slid the surprisingly small plastic body bag onto a gurney and wheeled it under the halogen lamp at the centre of the examination room. "Did you actually see the body?" he asked Gillard as he reached upwards to put the extractor fan on maximum. "Only cursorily." "Well, the victim was wearing a wig, which came off during the assault. Underneath, she had thinning hair, possibly alopecia. Her family mentioned that. It's not uncommon for a middle-aged woman to have thinning hair. However, I would just like to show you this. He unzipped the body bag, and despite the extractor fan, a gust of fetid air hit Gillard's nostrils. He suppressed his gag reflex as he looked at the damaged head. Mrs. Roy's face was pale considering her ethnicity, and was encrusted in black, dried blood. On the right-hand side were marks where Delahay's circular saw had cut through her skull so he could extract and weigh her brain. Her hair was sparse and a wispy auburn. "She's not done her roots recently," noted Gillard. "Yes, but look below that half-inch of white. There is a thin layer of dark pigmentation very close to the root. I remembered reading something about this from when I was a student, and had to look it up to be sure. I tested the hair in hydrogen peroxide, which confirms my initial suspicion, although I still hope I turn out to be wrong. Look at her toenails." Gillard looked at the nails, which looked misshapen. "Bit twisted," he said. "It's not so much that as this, which is known as a Mies line." Delahaye pointed to a thin white line a third of the way up her big toenail. "The nails and hair are effectively a tape recorder for some types of toxic exposure, and because of their natural rate of growth, they give us some idea of the time it happened." "What do you suspect?" "I think she may have been exposed to thallium, which is a potent and gradual poison and also causes alopecia. I've taken samples from the kidneys, which excrete the toxic chemical, and of course we would also find it in her urine and feces." "Ah, she drank her own urine, apparently." "Really? It's not unheard of as a folk remedy in the subcontinent. That certainly wouldn't help matters, as she would reabsorb what the kidneys had just flushed out." "Could this exposure be accidental?" 50 or 100 years ago, I would say yes. The most common exposure is in rudimentary rodenticides. In Britain in the present day, it would be pretty difficult to stumble across thallium by accident. If she was, let us say, active in metal processing, working with cadmium, lead or zinc, there would be a possibility of occupational contamination. As the victim of Indian ethnicity, it might be a visit home that could have provided the exposure. Gillard pursed his lips. "Her passport shows no visit to India in the last 6 months. Indeed, she's not been out of Europe in that time. It sounds like you're dubious that it could be an accident." "I really don't want to rush to judgment until I have her medical records and received the toxicology results. That should be this week. If the victim had reported any neurological symptoms to her doctor in recent weeks and months, that would certainly be a confirming outcome. It would tend to show itself as peripheral neuropathy, feelings of numbness in fingertips and toes, and some gastrointestinal symptoms, principally constipation. The family did say she'd been feeling tired and stressed." Delahaye chuckled and adjusted his glasses. "Well, that puts her in the same boat as more than half the population. I think one needs something a bit more specific." The mug smashed against the wall, splattering dregs of coffee all over the expensive flock wallpaper that had only been hung by an interior designer 6 months ago. "You idiot," Precious said to Simon, who cringed on the sofa where he was lying full length, iced daiquiri in hand. "I thought you'd stopped." Simon Parr Fielding, middle-aged, semi-retired antiques expert and far from retired gambler, was covering his position as best he could. He sat up, placed the drink on the end table and said, "Look, I had a few speculative open positions that I needed to close. It's just that some of them moved the wrong way, so I'm having to cough up some margin. I'm not paying for this anymore. Do you not understand?" She waved her phone, on which was displayed a statement of account from the spread betting company. He looked anywhere but at it. Her partner of 6 years still looked boyish despite his 57 years. Permatanned from his solarium sessions at the gym and a decent thatch of blondish hair. As always, he was dressed for the beach, probably the only place where he had ever been truly happy. He always maxed the central heating to mimic the tropics. He was wearing ragged cut-offs and a bleached denim shirt, 3 buttons open, revealing his fair chest hair. That was something she had always liked. Fair body hair was rather exotic to her, and until quite recently she had enjoyed running her hands through it. But now she wanted to take great handfuls of it and wrench it out by the roots. "This will be the last time, I promise, Prish, honestly." He stood up and reached out for her, as if to hug her. "Don't you dare touch me," she hissed and turned her back. "Look," he said, "we'll be fine once the will is sorted out. It's just a temporary phase." Prisha stared at herself in the ground mirror on the mantelpiece. Not yet 40, a hard-working businesswoman, it was beginning to show in the faint lines underneath her eyes, what Simon had once called those bewitching brown orbs. He had called her haughty, but really she was just shy and introverted. She had fought her way out of Indian orthodoxy, set up her own business, not relying on the family, asserting her own skills and abilities, divorced that idiot Deepak. And she had found, while on a 2-week beach holiday back in Mamallapuram, what she took to be a rather charming and kind English guy. The string bracelets and the leather bangles should probably have been a giveaway that this man, who had once been a senior advertising executive and was now divorced and penniless, was only destined to be a beach bum. If only she had known then what she knew now. His secretive booze habit she could just about handle. He was, after all, an affectionate drunk, not a violent one. But the secretive gambling was far more worrying, a bottomless pit of addiction. And now, with her mother murdered, he was still gambling. If only she had just a bit more cash, it would be easier to deal with. She had originally taken up Vedic astrology to try to guide the best moment to create a Hindu son. The first 2 years together, she and Simon had made love at least twice a day. For Simon, it was bliss on a stick. For her, a means to an end. Her eggs remained stubbornly unfertilized. She persuaded him to visit the GP and get a fertility test. The result was as she predicted. His sperm was as lazy and immobile as he was. Azoospermia, it was called. "That's a bit of a mouthful," Simon had said, as always making a joke of it. "Mine are apparently not very motile. Quite a lot of them were twisted or tailless." The regime, drinking less and a change of diet, seemed to make no difference, although whether Simon was following the first part of it she doubted. He never seemed to take on board that he was frittering away the last few reliable years of her own fertility and that she needed an additional source of sperm. She couldn't bear the idea of IVF. It was beyond consideration that any stranger's bodily fluids should be used to create her son. Simon's suggestion that one of his friends might be willing made her feel sick, especially as it sounded like Simon had already discussed it with him. Prisha's mother had never got on with Simon. It wasn't just his appalling laziness, but it was his grotesque informality, his lack of deference. The irony was that he was so bloody un-British. And just like Deepak, he seemed to think Empire of Spice was nothing more than a giant piggy bank. When he'd found Prisha, he'd thought he'd died and gone to heaven. Prisha was now glad that she had respected her mother's wish not to marry Simon. But for all that, she still couldn't help liking him. He made her laugh. He made her see that there was more to life than work. But this gambling just had to stop. She checked her Patek Philippe watch, a gift from her ex-husband, before she had exed him. She had not known at the time that he had charged it against expenses for the company. Still, that was Deepak for you. "I've got to go," she told Simon. "I'm going to be late for my meeting." Simon nodded. "Have fun," he said absent-mindedly as he reached for his daiquiri. Sometimes she thought he had guessed what these meetings were for. She closed the door behind her, grabbed her bag, and set off for the Hotel Orion. The Orion was as anonymous as any airport hotel could be. The tired 1970s monstrosity crouched so tightly beneath the Heathrow flight path that guests could open their curtains and from their pillows see the lowering of landing gear as an endless stream of Boeings and Airbuses screamed in overhead, from the first Far Eastern arrivals before 5 a.m. to the last thunderous departure after midnight. Refitted with triple glazing in the 1990s and aided by noisy air conditioning, most guests managed to sleep, if that's what they were there to do. Most of the ground floor was devoted to a succession of small, bland conference rooms, rented by the hour for executives flying in from who knows where. Groggy and jet-lagged, they would be welcomed by a large Formica table, 10 or so tubular metal chairs, a projector screen, and a Kona coffee machine. The TripAdvisor posts were pretty much to the point. It's just about okay for quick departmental meetings, but never bring your customers here to impress them. In the Derwent suite, number 36, a group of 16 new graduate trainees were being inducted into a sales and marketing company with a 3-letter name, which was aiming to take the technology sector by storm. They would be imprisoned in this hotel for 3 barely endurable weeks of stale air and prawn cocktail with Murray Rose sauce. In the Ullswater suite, number 40, there was a regional sales meeting for a cartridge refill company, hoping to make a mint from selling weight for weight, the computer industry's most valuable but archaic input, and the only one that never went down in price, printer ink. Between these two, in suite 38, Buttermere, an even more precious fluid was being coaxed from its cartridge. Prisha Roy, lying half-naked on a conference room table, was being serviced, her pelvis sliding forward to meet a pair of rapidly thrusting hips. She held her distaste in check for the familiar rhythm of the man standing trouserless at the table edge, in a crisp white shirt, and, in good old porn movie style, still wearing socks. Only one part of him, piston-like, was connected to her, because his hands were busy with what they had learned from a previous disastrous experience was a vital task, steadying the cheap and flimsy table, whose legs were wobblier than his own. That meant he could not hold her outspread calves, but instead balanced her ankles on the backs of 2 carefully placed chairs to either side of him. Comfortable it was not. It had been with the greatest reluctance that she had turned back to her ex. Deepak's sleek self-regard and arrogance was bad enough when they were married. Her request for a discreet, purely physical dalliance he treated as the ultimate compliment. For her, there was logic in it, of course. He had already fathered her daughter, who was now 11, and any child with him would undoubtedly be dark. She had worried that a child with Simon might be fair-skinned. Beautiful, of course, but he had to be brought up Hindu, and questions would of course be asked. She had sought help casting a Vedic horoscope for an auspicious moment for conception. But now, well, any time would have to do. She just hoped it happened soon, as she wanted minimum contact with Deepak. Once, seemingly many years ago, such a daring and low-rent coupling would have excited her. Now, even though Deepak was still pretty good, she would not let him have the satisfaction of knowing it. Mind over matter was the crucial thing. Suppressing her own orgasm was hardly necessary given the circumstances. Meeting him here in the same bland hotel every Monday and Wednesday afternoon for a cheap 1-hour conference multi-booking had been awkward enough. Unlike him, she was capable of remaining almost completely silent. As long as he ejaculated, that was the crucial thing. As copiously as possible, millions and millions of possibilities. She had suggested that on the 25-minute drive over he should sit with a bag of ice between his legs to maximize the volume of ejaculate. His response had been unprintable. From long practice and knowledge of his vocalization, she knew her ex-husband was within 6 thrusts of coming off. Fortunately, these particular sounds could easily be confused with the last gasps of a coffee percolator, and their neighbours would, hopefully, be none the wiser. The door, of course, was locked. One thing she had not counted on was his phone, trilling noisily at the crucial moment. Don't you dare stop, she hissed. His head moved momentarily leftward to where the device lay next to her on the table. She wasn't having it. She reached between their bodies, seized his scrotum with her sharp fingernails, and at the same time clenched as hard as she could with her pelvic floor. That did the trick. He groaned, forgot about the phone, and emptied himself into her. He collapsed, spent across her body, and the table on which they were both balanced lurched alarmingly. The phone stopped. From previous experience, she knew he would be asleep in under 10 seconds, so she began to wriggle out from beneath him, partly because her back was killing her, but also out of curiosity to find out if Deepak's annoyingly clingy girlfriend Victoria had been calling. This whole hotel arrangement had been designed to keep her in the dark. Before Prisha could execute the manoeuvre, the phone rang again, and this time Deepak disengaged himself and woozily reached across to answer it. "I told you to turn it off," hissed Prisha. Ignoring her, he picked up his trousers and turned away to disguise his softening member. He let the phone continue to trill as he walked into the kitchenette and closed the door behind him. Prisha slipped off the table, pulled her knickers on and pressed her ear to the kitchenette wall. She could hear him pacing around inside the tiled enclosure. "Could you not have waited?" Deepak whispered as he answered the call. "I can't talk now. Can I call you later?" Pause. "I'm not going to sell. There's much more to be made." There was a pause. "You worry too much. I'm sure it will be fine. We've already made millions out of it. Well, she may have run the company, but I think this proves that my judgment is better than hers was." Kirsty Mockett lay on her exercise mat, staring at the ceiling. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, and the flat was finally warm after having the heating on full blast for 45 minutes. She was comfortable just wearing a t-shirt and underwear for her daily routine. She breathed in slowly, pulling in her diaphragm, and concentrated on clearing her mind through the gentle exhalation. She raised one leg into the air, put a rubber stretch band under her instep, and with both hands pulled her leg until it was almost vertical. Her hamstrings burned with the effort, and she was unable to prevent a grimace. So much for relaxation. Her first 3 days as a scenes of crime officer had been an anti-climax after the trauma of Sunday. It had included a tour of Surrey's Mount Brown Police Headquarters in Guildford, and a detailed account of CSI's place in the investigative hierarchy. However, her colleagues and the training officers seemed more interested in getting her to tell them about what she had seen at the Mrs. Roy crime scene than in inducting her into the Surrey-Sussex force. When she wasn't being buttonholed about her experiences, she was subject to a more personal interest. Ryan, a young officer on her course, had on the very first day asked her out on a date. Embarrassed, Kirsty had blurted out a defensive lie about a steady boyfriend outside the force. Now, unbidden, a vision swam into her mind. A field of fresh snow, a dead body and spatters of blood among the whirling snowflakes. This was the image that she had been trying to banish, but which slipped back into her mind 100 times a day. In the shower, on the loo, waiting for the bus. "Go away," she muttered, folding her hands behind her head and beginning a fast series of sit-ups to drive away the memory. 20 straight crunches, followed by another 20 left elbow to right knee, and then 20 right elbow to left knee. She carried on working up a sweat for another half an hour, until the muscle burn and breathlessness forced her to stop. Kirsty's phone rang just as she was getting out of the shower. With a large, fluffy bath sheet wrapped around her and a blue hand towel turbaned on her hair, she scampered into the bedroom to find her mobile. She was taken aback by the voice at the other end. All the warmth of the hot water and the relaxation turned to ice. "How are you, Kirsty? Are you enjoying life?" "I hadn't expected to hear from you." She unconsciously pulled the towel a little more closely around her body and nestled on the bed closer to the heater. I was just reading that it was you who witnessed that awful attack on Mrs. Roy. That's quite a coincidence that you should be there, don't you think?
I was just going for a run, that's all.
From what I read, you did terribly well.
Look, I've just got out of the shower and I need—
Well, well, what an enticing image that presents. He laughed softly. Quite inflammatory, I would say.
I don't know why you called after all this time, she said, unless it was to apologize.
There was a long pause. I was hoping the passage of time may have softened you a little, but it seems not. I was going to offer to take you to dinner somewhere a bit special.
My boyfriend wouldn't approve.
There was soft laughter on the end of the phone. Kirsty, dear Kirsty. That same old mythical boyfriend who you've been seeing for goodness knows how many years.
I'm going to hang up now,
Kirsty said. Wait. You did such a good job for me, and now you're in a position to give me even more of the information that I would like.
You're bloody joking if you think—
There's money, Kirsty, he said softly. You know how you like money.
Look, I only took the money because—
You don't have to tell me. We don't have to go into that again. We have an agreement, and that's an end to it. We have each kept our side of the bargain.
I don't want to hear from you again.
Dear Kirsty, don't be shy. We both know the truth. You know you need money. When you have processed that thought, ring me. I'll be expecting your call.
The line clicked dead.
Kirsty swore softly. She was shaking. The wave of stress and anxiety swept through her. There was only one thing that would keep it at bay. She drew the curtains, let the towel fall to the floor, and reached into the bedside drawer. A few minutes later, as the buzzing pleasure came in wave after wave, tears escaped from the outer corners of her tightly closed eyes and rolled down her cheeks and into her ears. It was the first evening that Gillard had arrived home at a reasonable time since the case began. Now, at 9 o'clock, they lay entwined on the sofa, each trying to read. Sam was engrossed in 101 Tastes from the Subcontinent, Mrs. Roy's Guide to Indian Cuisine. It was published just a few weeks before her death and was now, according to the papers, flying off the shelves. Gillard had been flicking through a true crime expose of American serial killers in the 1980s, but when Sam looked up to tell him about a particularly interesting Goan curry, she saw that he had dozed off. She smiled to herself and laid her book on the end table. In repose, her husband looked younger than his 50 years, more boyish, less rugged, less capable. She wanted to stroke his face, but it was such a rare and precious moment to see him like this, almost vulnerable. His mouth was slightly open, no sign of his usual bunched jaw muscles. The stress, the professionalism, the cynicism, the gut instinct were all packed away somewhere in some mental filing cabinet, ready to be retrieved at a moment's notice. The gentle tone of his phone indicated a call. The device lay on the dining table 10 feet away, but his eyes flicked open immediately. Instant wakefulness, immediate awareness. He stroked her thigh as he untangled his legs from hers and went to pick up the mobile. She continued to watch him, broad shoulders flexing, legs astride as he shifted into work mode. Gillard. A slight softening in his stance in the next few seconds indicated to Sam that the caller was a familiar and trusted contact. "Okay, Claire, that's great news." After he hung up, he responded to Sam's quizzical expression by saying, "We found a DNA link at the crime scene. Someone who's at the punch-up outside the pub on Saturday night looks to have been present at the Ashtead Common crime scene just a few hours later. He left a single hair on Mrs. Roy, and he's got some previous for a fray. Claire has got an address and he's going round to make the arrest right now."
Seems like a breakthrough.
"Yes. If she gets him in the cells tonight, we'll be able to interview him first thing tomorrow." Half an hour later, just as they were getting ready for bed, Sam stood at the front bedroom window in her underwear, looking through a tiny gap in the curtains. There, she's at it again. She's got her binoculars looking up here. Craig looked over her shoulder and could see his aunt, binoculars pressed to her face, peering out of the bungalow opposite. I can't believe after all we have been through that she is here stalking us like nothing has happened. Those vile baby clothes too. What about the retrial? Sam asked. Surely they must be thinking about that. Craig embraced his wife, pulling her back into the room. The CPS says they don't have any chance of success without fresh evidence. The story of Craig's aunt Trish was an open wound with both of them. Her involvement in the notorious Exmoor hit-and-run killing 18 months ago had consumed both their lives at the time. After the collapse of the trial last summer, Trish had left Devon for good and bought a bungalow right opposite Craig's house here in Surrey. I didn't tell you, Sam said. This morning, when I was up being sick, I went to the downstairs loo not to disturb you, and her bloody cat was sitting outside the kitchen door clawing at the old cat flap trying to be let in. You're joking. No, seriously. It was that ginger and white one, Napoleon. It had left some headless bird on the lawn too. Revolting creature. I glued the flap shut months ago so it shouldn't be able to make any headway. But it was making a horrible scratching sound like it was bending the plastic. I'll check it, but I'm sure it's fine. Just try to forget about it. He gathered her close in his arms. Perhaps we should sell up and move away from her. Could we? Sam looked up into Craig's face. She hadn't dared raise the subject, thinking he'd never want to move again after the hassle last time. I like the house, but... No. I've got to get you away from here, and for the sake of our child, too. Can you speak to the estate agents tomorrow if you get a chance? Of course. Sam remembered to turn off the light before she kissed her husband. That way no shadow would be cast on the curtains, and the baleful gaze of Trish Gibson could be kept at bay. Chapter 8. Thursday. When the custody sergeant at Epsom Police Station hauled Jason Waddington out of the cells and brought him up to an interview room, he was already spoiling for a fight. What the fuck is this about? Waddington yelled as he was unceremoniously dumped on a fixed chair opposite DCI Gillard and DI Claire Mulholland. He was a rangy individual, mid-30s with a crown of spiky dark hair on top of an otherwise shaven head. He had an incipient beard and trendy tortoiseshell spectacles taped up across the bridge of the nose, returned to him after they had been broken in the pub fight. First off, I get smacked in the mouth while having a pint in the Feathers, which was not my fault at all. Next, you hang on to my specs for 3 days so I can hardly see. Next thing I know, I'm arrested at home about some killing. It's fucking scandalous. Calm down, Jason, Claire said. Behind Waddington, the door of the interview room opened and the custody sergeant showed in a young, pale woman whom he introduced as the duty solicitor. Waddington continued to rant while they were preparing the tape recorder and getting their notes in order. The solicitor clarified with Claire that Waddington had not been charged and established that he had been offered something to eat both soon after arrest and this morning. The formalities completed, Gillard began. Okay, Jason. Where were you at 7:30 in the morning on Sunday? At home in bed. Is there anyone who could corroborate that story? Claire asked. My girlfriend, obviously. He folded his arms as if that was the safest of alibis. Claire took down the details and address of the woman. What did you do after I'd taken your statement and you left at the Three Feathers on Saturday night? Gillard asked. I went down A&E with Paul. I take it that is Paul Welby? Claire asked. Yeah, he was in a right state, suspected broken jaw. What time did you leave the hospital? Gillard asked. What the fuck do you care? Don't be difficult, Jason, Claire said. I stayed there maybe an hour, then I drove home. Sober? Too right by then. Nothing sobers you up faster than seeing your mate get kicked in the head. I'd only had a couple anyway. Do you know Ashtead Common at all? Gillard asked.
Yeah, obviously I live round the corner, don't I? I go running there most days.
Do you know this woman? He passed across a publicity photograph of Mrs. Roy.
Obviously. I heard about the killing, and I've seen her on the telly, but I've never seen her face to face, and just so you know, I didn't kill her, right?
So, why is there some of your DNA on her raincoat? Gillard asked.
You what?
His mouth hung open. You heard correctly, Gillard said. I took a swab from your mouth to eliminate you from all the suspects in the pub fight, and it just happens to match a hair we found on that raincoat.
That's impossible.
DNA doesn't lie, my friend, Gillard said. Now, do you own a bicycle? Waddington stared belligerently at the two detectives.
Obviously. I work at a fucking bike shop, don't I?
Prisha Roy had asked Liaison Officer Gabby Underwood for a private meeting with the officer in charge of the investigation. Gillard had agreed to meet her, although he was a little surprised that she suggested that they meet at the Orion Hotel near Heathrow Airport. He was less than impressed when she left him kicking his heels in reception for 40 minutes before she arrived. Even the receptionist had given him a funny look when he said he was there to meet Miss Roy.
"Do you want me to show you to the Buttermere suite?" she asked.
No, I'll wait for her here. He took a seat in the lounge, but wouldn't have been a detective had he not spotted from the corner of his eye that the two female receptionists were discussing him. One of them giggled as she left to go into a back room. The black Porsche Cayenne with personalised number plate was hardly discreet, and didn't quite square with Prisha's request not to come to a police station or have a police vehicle come to her home. She slid it into a disabled parking spot close to the entrance. Gillard wondered whether this thoughtless parking was evidence of her being embarrassed to be late and wanted to minimise any further delay. He revised his opinion as he watched her spend 5 minutes touching up her makeup in the rearview mirror and brushing her hair. Finally, she opened the door and made her way to the hotel entrance with the unhurried gait of a catwalk model.
"My apologies for the delay, Detective Chief Inspector."
She pushed her large sunglasses onto the top of her head and shook his hand as he stood to greet her. She was wearing a conservatively cut dark blue jacket and trousers and patent leather shoes with a low heel. Her large brown eyes were lined with kohl, which gave them an arresting intensity. She immediately took charge and checked with the receptionist to make sure her usual meeting room was ready. She then led the DCI down a long featureless corridor within which the scream of jet engines could only just be heard. As they walked side by side, she turned to him.
"Before you ask me any questions, I want to ask if you have a suspect in mind for the murder of my mother. Have you identified that damned cyclist?"
"Well, as I think you know, we have a description."
"Yes, but do you know who it is? I asked your liaison officer and she couldn't tell me."
"That's because we don't know. We're at an early stage in the inquiry."
"Detective Chief Inspector, my mother was one of the most prominent female businesswomen in the country. Her murder is a national tragedy, and it doesn't sound to me like Surrey Police is resourcing this properly."
"Ms. Roy, let me assure you that we have a very large investigative team, one of the largest that we have ever deployed for a murder. The best way to speed up that inquiry is to cooperate fully, even with what may seem like intrusive questions." She ignored his reply, slid her keycard into the door and let him into the meeting room. Beyond the aroma of stale coffee was some other musty locker room smell. Once seated, she turned off her phone, set it to one side and gave him her full attention. "All right, now your questions. Fire away," she said. "Now, I know you are the eldest daughter, but my understanding is that you don't play any active part in the company."
"No, I don't. I think you may be able to guess the Indian rules of inheritance, and I have only a limited stake in the company. I have spread my wings in other directions."
"Was Friday the last time you saw your mother?"
"Yes."
"So you didn't see her over the weekend?"
"No. I think you know that I live in Hertfordshire. My partner and I have our own life there, with my daughter, Indigo."
Gillard passed across a sheaf of papers. "We've looked through your mother's phone and found she'd been in contact with quite a lot of people over the last month. It would be helpful if you would confirm any numbers here that you're aware of, which will save us a lot of time chasing up the details." I see you refer to emails and texts. Whose permission did you gain to access all this confidential data?
Your brother's. Her phone had a password, but with our data kiosk we can extract all the metadata, texts and emails within half an hour. It often doesn't tell us who owns the phone she was called from, and obviously we don't know what was said, but anything you can tell us will save time. Prisha sighed and flicked through the papers.
Well, that's mine. That is my daughter, whose birthday it was last week. I see you have already got Harry's number labelled.
Using her own phone, she cross-referenced another dozen contacts on the phone.
There, that's all I can help you with.
Gillard locked eyes with her. Can you think of anyone who had a grudge against your mother? Any former employee or business associate? Was she, to your knowledge, being stalked by anyone? After all, she was a familiar face on television. She probably got fan mail. There was a flicker in those brown eyes, which Gillard knew from long experience indicated that she knew something.
So you're sure this wasn't a robbery? She asked, or some random argument with a stranger?
We are keeping an open mind, but your mother's wealth and position give us some obvious motives to work from. Anything that you can think of would be helpful.
She paused. I'll have to have a think about that.
Finally, there is something I have to ask. Where were you at 7:30 a.m. last Sunday? She stared at him, enmity radiating from her features.
I was in bed asleep at home in Hertfordshire with my partner Simon. The first I knew about my mother's death was when Harry rang me just before 10.
I'm sorry to upset you, but it is something we had to ask. It's just a formality.
Perhaps there are things that you should know. I had lunch with my mother on Friday. She had agreed to invest some money into the expansion of my business.
That's a spa in Marylebone, isn't it?
It's not just a spa. It's an Ayurvedic wellness centre promoting deep cleansing of body and mind. It's been doing very well, but a lease has come up for larger premises nearby. My mother was going to transfer the money on Monday, but of course she didn't. Now, because of the delay, I've just been told that somebody else has taken up the lease.
Gillard spread his hands. What do you expect me to do about it? Well, of course, that is very inconvenient for you. It's inevitable that many major decisions can't be taken after a death like this. I understand your brother's wedding is on hold, too. She stared at him with the intensity of a hawk.
When this murder happened is no accident, believe me. The timing is very significant.
What do you mean? Prisha sighed and let her hands fall to the table, as if having second thoughts. When she looked up, her face was softer and more reflective.
When I was a little girl, my father gave me a doll. She was white, as you couldn't get Asian-featured dolls in Britain at that time. I painted her face brown to match my own and made her a sari from scraps of material. And then I made her jewellery from cooking foil and some of my grandmother's old beads.
Now her eyes focused on him.
I believe in shaping my own destiny, our family's destiny. But someone is trying to destroy us, to change and ultimately control our wonderful company.
Who controls your company isn't my concern. It's only my concern if this same person could have been involved in the death of your mother.
She leaned forward. But I think there is a link. I don't want to name names, but you're a detective. You can find out.
Gillard leaned back in the chair and spread his arms. Actually, I do want you to name names and to offer me some evidence if you have any.
Oh, there's no real evidence. She's too clever for that.
Do you mean the operations manager, Morag Fairburn?
Prisha inclined her head in acknowledgement. So you do have a nose for the criminal element.
I'm aware that she mentioned continued hostility from you, that's all.
I'm the eldest. I have to look after our family, particularly now. Did you know that my grandmother predicted exactly when her daughter, my mother, would die?
How?
It was in her star chart.
I'm sorry, but I've never believed in astrology.
Prisha gave a look of amused indulgence. That's a typical Aries thing to say. Gillard laughed, and so did she, but her next utterance was a bombshell. Craig Michael Gillard. Date of birth, 18th April 1967 in Croydon. Rising sign, Sagittarius, cusp of Leo. It seems you had a very bad year in 1986 that nearly destroyed you. It's as bold as brass on your birth sign. But next year will be even worse. He was stunned, because it was true. As an innocent 18-year-old, he had fallen head over heels in love with a brilliant and charismatic girl, one completely out of his league. Liz had dumped him when she went off to Cambridge, leaving him in pieces. He had even considered suicide. It took him years to get over her, if he ever had. But how could Prisha possibly know this? The detective fixed her with his steeliest gaze. I don't know what you're trying to do, but I'm not impressed. He was lying. He still didn't believe in astrology, but Prisha was right. He was impressed. And worried. I didn't mean to worry you, Detective Chief Inspector. Casting horoscopes is just a little hobby of mine. If it's so good, I suggest you use it to find out who killed your mother. He said a hurried goodbye and walked out along the endless, echoing corridor back to reception. One of the receptionists he'd seen earlier gave him a cheery greeting. Did you enjoy your stay? She called out as he passed. I've only been here an hour, he replied. As he exited the sliding doors, he could hear gales of laughter behind him. He'd been made a fool of, but he wasn't sure how. And how on earth did that woman know so much about him? Research Intelligence Officer Rob Townsend caught up with Gillard as he was arriving back at Mount Brown. Just been having a look at Mrs. Roy's laptop, and there's some video footage on there you might like to look at. OK, make it quick. I've been summoned to see Rigby in a few minutes. Meetings with the Chief Constable always made him nervous, and she was a stickler for punctuality. Townsend led Gillard into his office, where almost every surface was covered with pieces of computer equipment. Laptops, hard drives, and, standing aside on the floor, the precious data kiosk, which saved them hours on extracting the data from phones. The young detective constable was constantly teased about being an anorak, but his skills had been crucial in an increasing array of investigations. Electronic evidence was playing more and more of a central role in prosecutions, and given the explosion in online data, being able to access and interpret it quickly was vital. Townsend clicked on his own PC, in which a data stick was sticking out of a USB port. Video software opened with slightly choppy and grainy footage of a suburban semi-detached house viewed from inside a car parked on the other side of the road. The date subscript was 18 May the previous year. The front door of the house opened, and a woman that Gillard recognised as Morag Fairburn emerged, turning to speak to somebody within. The voiceover was clipped and technical. OK, 07:45 hours, here's some action. Miss B leaving house, embraces target at the door. The camera zoomed in closer. Gillard could clearly see the target was a dishevelled Harry Roy in a bathrobe. Miss B walks to garage. She slid up the door, went inside, and a short while later a black BMW 3 Series emerged. Vehicle B emerges, Miss B at the wheel. The car turned right out of the drive past the surveillance vehicle and out of camera shot. There's more, Townsend said. He slid the cursor along until the sound chart spiked, indicating more narrative. The next video was almost identical, but on a different day. They're all pretty much like this, Townsend said. This is pretty innocent stuff, surely, Gillard asked. Why on earth would Mrs. Roy have a private detective watching her own son? I think I have an answer for you. I dug up an old email from her to the agency Walker Chapman. She's looking for evidence that her son is having what she calls an illicit affair. Gillard frowned as he read the letter written by Mrs. Roy to the agency. He's not married. What on earth is illicit about him having a girlfriend? I mean, I know some Asian families are quite conservative, but really the man was already in his 30s. Still, it seems to be what she is saying. I suppose it's an issue now he's getting an arranged marriage to somebody that presumably they do approve of.
Townsend shrugged.
I'm not saying it is relevant to the case, but it is interesting.
Gillard thanked him and left the room, now in danger of being late. As he did so, his phone rang. It was D.I. Claire Mulholland. "Claire, what have you got?" he asked as he climbed the stairs 2 at a time.
Hi, Craig. The lab has managed to identify the make of the cyclist's training shoe from its indentation in the snow at the crime scene. They're run-of-the-mill Adidas trainers.
That's not going to help unless we find the very same shoes in the possession of a suspect.
Likewise with the fibres found on the dog's muzzle. They are a bog-standard mixture of polyester and cotton, grey. They're a basic match to dozens of brands of jogging bottoms in hundreds of stores. The lab says we can get Staffordshire University to do a more detailed analysis, but it will take time.
OK, go for it. We want all the details we can get. Chief Constable Alison Rigby was on a long conference call when Gillard arrived outside her office, and he had to wait almost 20 minutes before going in. The Detective Chief Inspector knew what kind of reception he was going to get when he saw 6 newspapers on her coffee table, each of which was open at an article about the mysterious murder of Mrs. Roy.
"Take a seat, Craig,"
she said, indicating the low chairs around the coffee table.
"I have been looking at the coverage of the crime, which seems to be highly speculative. Have you seen all these?"
"No, I've been a little bit too busy to try to keep up to date with everything they're saying. One thing is apparent. They do have a great many more people to throw at this than I do." Rigby locked eyes with him. She was a handsome woman, 6'2" tall, and her enormous pale blue eyes rimmed in dark eyeliner were almost magnetic. Her gaze was known as the blue stare of death and intimidated even the most senior and experienced officers. "Actually, considering the resource constraints we are operating under, I have been extremely generous in resources for you. I may be able to give you a little more, but in exchange I would certainly like to see some solid progress. Did you see this?" She passed across the Daily Telegraph, folded to show a business article which had been circled in highlighter pen. Britain's premier food magnate Johnny Lamb has again said that he is willing to buy Empire of Spice plc for a generous price if the family are willing to sell. Lamb, whose own company, Hong Kong and International Cuisine, is the biggest distributor of ethnic food to Britain's restaurant trade, has reiterated that EOS would make a good fit with his other businesses. "I'm in contact with members of Mrs. Roy's family at the moment. Although they are very upset by what has happened, they will at least be able to sleep at night knowing that the business is in good and capable hands," he told us.
"This is standard city speculation," Gillard said. "We've been in contact with Mr. Lamb's firm, but he hasn't got back to us. However, at this stage, I don't see any connection to the murder. The Roy family and the company trust between them control a majority of the shares."
"That's all very well for you to say, Craig. I'm hearing a lot of talk from some senior figures at the National Crime Agency and the Met who say that we're just out of our depth."
"I've heard that whistling buffoon Norman Champion saying exactly that."
"I'm not too concerned about him, but as things currently stand, investigative journalists seem to be making most of the running."
"What do you mean?"
"Well, this, for example, from the Times yesterday morning. Simon Parr Fielding, the partner of Prisha Roy, has a conviction for Class B possession. He is barred from being a director of a company after repeated failures to meet the listing requirements given by Companies House, and is also, according to the paper, in considerable debt." She tossed the newspaper across to him. "Did you know this?"
"No, Ma'am. I haven't had a chance to interview all the members of the family and their spouses. That isn't the direction that the evidence is leading."
"Oh. And in which direction is the evidence leading?"
"We have a suspect in custody whose DNA was found at the scene of the crime and happens to work at a bicycle shop. He also lives within 5 minutes' walk of where Mrs. Roy's body was found."
"Does he have a motive?"
"We're still working on that, Ma'am." Gillard knew that this very moment Claire and a CSI team were going over Jason Waddington's home with a fine-tooth comb. He was sure that they would turn something up.
"The point is, Craig, that in the absence of anything for the press to get their teeth into, we are looking like we are stumped. How soon do you think you'll be able to charge the suspect?"
"I'd rather not do that, Ma'am, until we're sure. For example, it's not impossible that as the suspect is a regular user of the common, Mrs. Roy's coat may have innocently picked up one of his hairs when she fell. I'd prefer to see what else we can get from the murder weapon and the search of his home. We can hold him for another day or so.
OK, she said, picking up the phone. I'm going to ring Christina McCafferty. I want her to get a statement out there that we have someone helping us with our inquiries. He waited while Rigby rang the press officer and gave her a concise 30-second set of instructions. Gillard would rather have waited for the DNA results from the murder weapon, but he was in no position to contest the Chief Constable's judgment. She had good reasons to move fast. Back at his desk, Gillard took a quick break to ring Sam. She was on duty in the control room and called him back as soon as she was able.
Hi, it's me, what's up?
Sam, I just had a really strange and unsettling experience. I was interviewing Prisha Roy, one of the daughters of our murder victim, and she seems to know a lot about me.
Really?
Yes. My exact date and place of birth, which I suppose you can look up on the General Register Office. But then the weirdest thing, she knew that I had a terrible year in 1986. I don't know how she could have known that. Any ideas?
Maybe she knew Liz Knight. How old is she?
Too young to be a school classmate. It's really strange. She says she cast a horoscope of me. Said she needed to know that the man in charge of the investigation had the personal qualities required to find the culprit. Do you know anything about astrology?
No, it's probably just guesswork. Or she asked someone about you.
I suppose she could have dug up the newspaper coverage of the Knight murder trial. That mentioned my relationship with Liz, didn't it?
That's right, Craig. She's probably just playing mind games.
Maybe you're right. He blew her a kiss down the phone and was about to hang up when she spoke.
Craig, you know I really trust you, don't you?
Yes. Oh, shit, he knew where this might be going.
Well, the conversation with that woman, if I may say, sounds a bit intimate. How did she come to be discussing personal things like this with you?
Before he could reply, she added,
You don't fancy her, do you?
Not at all, Sam.
What does she look like?
Gillard could hardly give her the truth, which was that she was tall and slim with dazzling come-hither eyes, full lips and glossy dark hair that most women would kill for. Like most men, he could see that she was trouble and all the more enticing because of it. So he gave her the more palatable half of the truth. She's not my type. Nasty, snide, controlling.
Those aren't looks, but good.
The pause was not good news. Sam was circling the issue to approach from a fresh angle.
So, this Prisha Roy, she said all those personal things in an interview room in front of Claire and some lawyer?
Gillard tried to laugh, but it came out like a cough. No, she's not a suspect. It was an informal chat.
At her house?
No. He might as well tell her. This wouldn't look good.
Where then?
At the Orion Hotel, Heathrow.
In reception, I damn well hope, not in a room.
Sam's voice had acquired an edge he could have shaved with. It was a room, a conference room. It's one she uses frequently, apparently.
I bet she does.
Sam, stop being jealous. There's nothing to be jealous about.
I wouldn't be jealous if you weren't so damned evasive. Why did you agree to meet her there?
Because she asked to, Sam, because I needed to see her quickly and it was the only gap in her diary, because I thought I could get more information in an informal setting.
Then you should have booked a bloody double room with champagne and chocolates. She would have told you everything.
Gabby Underwood arrived in the incident room to find her Detective Chief Inspector staring in a puzzled fashion at the telephone receiver in his hand. She could hear the dialing tone.
You have to hit the buttons if you want to make a call, sir, she said with a smirk.
Gillard shook his head. Sorry, someone just hung up on me. She guessed who, but decided to keep her lip buttoned. As an experienced liaison officer, she knew exactly when to stay quiet. She was just back from visiting Harry Roy at his flat in Walton-on-Thames, her second visit.
Once she finally had her boss's attention, she described the luxurious penthouse apartment with extensive views of the river. "So, how did he seem?" Gillard said. "Depressed," she replied. "Definitely very down. He was sitting in his dressing gown in this beautiful flat with the curtains drawn, just binge-watching DVDs. He hasn't been to work for days. He hasn't even shaved. I get the impression there is a big backlog of work building up, which somebody needs to do. I had rung him earlier, and his landline answering machine and mobile voicemail are both full. He wasn't answering, not to me at least." "Nor me. I really need to interview him again," Gillard said. "I got a call back from Morag Fairburn, who said that his doctor won't let him be put under pressure. I really can't wait much longer, though. So, did you find out anything?" "Not from him. He didn't pay me any attention, just watched TV while I ran around making him tea and fetching biscuits from the kitchen. He is the sort of man who looks like he's been used to being waited on hand and foot. I think his bride-to-be should be warned," she laughed. "Did he ask you about the investigation?" "Not really, just at the beginning. He asked, 'Got him yet?' and that was it." "Did you get much chance to look around the flat?" "A little. It's not too messy because he has someone come in to clear up for him, but it's clear that he's not looking after himself. I think he totally depended on his mother. I tried asking him about his fiancée to cheer him up, and he just groaned. Sonali's a feisty little woman, apparently, and she's on his case every day, dozens of texts and emails." "Well, I do sort of see her point. The wedding was supposed to be next week." "I don't think he was looking forward to it. It seems to me his entire life has been in thrall to strong women. He's just got rid of one, his mother. Now he's about to have another foisted upon him." "When you say got rid of—" "Oh, I didn't mean it that way, boss. He's bereft, honestly, without his mother. Worse than either of his sisters." "So your intuition would be that he's not capable of murder?" "I doubt it, frankly. And particularly not that particular murder. He's just a big kid. He showed me pictures of him teaching disabled kids to play cricket. It was the only time I was there that he really smiled. I think that is what he'd like to do. He's clearly bored by his job, but has got used to the money that comes from being in the family firm." "Well, thank you as always, Gabby, for your insight." He was about to ring off when she said, "Oh, I nearly forgot. The most interesting thing that happened was before I even got there, as I was coming up in the lift. The doors opened onto the top floor and I heard someone shouting. And it wasn't Harry, but I think it was at Harry. I didn't really understand it, but perhaps it means something to you." "What did you hear?" "It was, 'If you learned to keep it zipped, you wouldn't have to worry, would you? So you're in no position to threaten me. I'm making you all a fortune, remember? Not that I get any thanks for it.' Then the door slammed, and the man who said it walked past me and into the lift. He did seem angry." "Did you recognize him?" "No, but I did lean out of the window and get a photograph of the car he drove away in. With a bit of enlargement, we should be able to get some clue about the number plate." "Well done," Gillard said. "So what was your take on it?" "Harry is having an affair, presumably." "I wouldn't rush to that conclusion. He could have meant that Harry should have kept his mouth shut. Keep it zipped can also refer to that." "Maybe it's about Morag," she said enthusiastically. "That fits into the idea of the private detective watching him and her." "Perhaps, but I still don't get what was so unsuitable about Morag, why they hated that relationship so much." "I take it you didn't ask Harry about what you overheard?" "I think that's above my pay grade, sir." Gillard laughed. "Quite right, Gabby. I'm sure you wouldn't have got a straight answer anyway, and neither would I. But at least what you overheard gives us a handhold to get on the inside of this family." "I'm good at listening, sir." He gave her an approving look. "Yes, I know you are." Claire Mulholland's search of Jason Waddington's terraced house went smoothly. The warrant was issued quickly and there was nobody present at the property to get in the way. A CSI transit van was backed up to the house so that bin bags full of bedding and the plastic bags containing his electronic gear could be quickly loaded. Claire peered into the spare bedroom where a female member of CSI was on her hands and knees in a Tyvek suit going through the waste paper bin at the side of the single bed. "Have you found any trainers?" Claire asked. "Yes, downstairs, I think," she said without turning around. "And jogging bottoms, but they are black, not grey, and they don't seem to have any dog bites in them." Claire laughed. "He'd have to be really dim not to have chucked them." "Oh, did you say that?" Claire said, pointing to the windowsill where a bodybuilder's supplement bottle sat. The woman eased herself up to her knees, sighed heavily and asked, "Did you want me to take that as well?" She pulled out a paper evidence envelope. "That's not what I mean. If this guy is a bodybuilder, which that seems to indicate, we might find some weights around the house." The woman looked blankly at her. "Remember what the murder weapon was?" Claire asked, folding her arms. "Ah, see what you mean." The woman scratched her head. With a Tyvek hood and gloves, it was as noisy as someone rustling for sweets during a love scene in the cinema. Claire left her to it. In the end, the weights were not found in the bedroom, but in the garage. Substantial gym weights, a stand, a bench press, and a cross-trainer. The hand weights were modern and cushioned, not at all like the crude cast-iron weapon that had been smashed into Mrs. Roy's skull. She looked around her and found another connection. There were 3 bicycles hung on hooks on the wall. Each was as light as a feather and probably highly expensive. The tyres were of a tubular, high-pressure road variety, quite unlike the wide mountain bike tyres whose impression was left at Ashted Common. Nonetheless, this was quite encouraging. The DNA put him at the scene. He lived nearby. He was a cyclist, seemed to be a bodybuilder, and owned hand weights. The one fly in the ointment was that there was no obvious motive. Perhaps it could really have been an argument about the dog. Perhaps Jason Waddington had a temper. Considering the damage he had done to Mrs. Roy's skull, that would be some tantrum. If so, then he certainly deserved to be locked up for a very long time indeed. Nearly 5 o'clock on Thursday, and the promised forensic results on the murder weapon had yet to arrive. Gillard rang the forensic lab's operations manager and was told that they had managed to extract enough DNA, but the comparison process was not yet complete. "My problem is that I've got someone here who has to either be charged with a crime or released in 1 hour's time. I really need to know if the hair on the victim's raincoat matches any sweat samples you've managed to lift from the hand weight. Can you get it to me before then?" "I'll do what I can," she replied, "but I can't promise." "Okay," Gillard sighed. He then read out the unique reference numbers for the 2 pieces of evidence. The manager said she would pass the message along. The moment he hung up, he saw D.I. Mulholland and steered her into a meeting room. "All right, Claire, the press release has already gone out that we're holding an unnamed 33-year-old man in connection with the murder." He looked at his watch. "I want your gut feeling about whether we should go ahead and charge him." Claire nodded. "I assumed we would," she said. "When I spoke to the CPS this morning and mentioned the DNA, they said they didn't need any more details. They were more than happy to go ahead. We can get him in front of the magistrates first thing tomorrow and ask for him to be remanded into custody. Waddington's only alibi is his girlfriend, but the statement Hodges got from her seems a little non-committal. With the forensic connection, it's clear the lawyers think we have enough evidence." "What about his home?" "There is some circumstantial stuff. The weightlifting equipment, the bikes, his proximity to the crime scene. We found plenty of trainers and bike shoes, all Nike, and more upmarket than the Adidas print we have linked to the scene, but there's no smoking gun." The DCI shook his head. "Something about this just doesn't feel right. The way Waddington reacted to the allegations seemed to me entirely natural. Underneath the anger was a wounded innocence. Part of me keeps saying, I don't think he was lying." "Then we should let him go." He blew a sigh. "I'm under huge pressure from Rigby." The talking heads on TV, people like Norman Champion and all those sneering Met officers who are friends with the crime reporters on the Nationals, are briefing the press that this is a shambolic investigation. Yesterday, the Daily Express ran a headline saying, "What a pickle," with a picture of a spilled jar of brinjal chutney and a headline inside saying, "Curry up and find the killer." Well, I can guess why Rigby wants a quick result. The annual police chiefs conference is next week and she wants something to brag about in front of the sneering men. Yes, it could be that. He could see she was trying to cheer him up. "Hey, did you see this?" she asked, plucking a cutting from her jacket pocket. "It's from Tuesday's edition of The Sun and headlined, 'The Hero of the Hour.'" Gillard sighed and looked at the half-page photograph of Mrs. Roy's dog Bertie, looking with Churchillian steadiness into a camera lens held at dog height. While the police are floundering in their attempt to bring to justice the killer of our Empress of Spice, brave Bertie the boxer did not hesitate to defend her to the last. While the attacker laid about his mistress with a hammer, the doughty animal became her personal bodyguard, and despite being bludgeoned by the same deadly weapon that killed Mrs. Roy, Bertie fought back, snapping and biting at the assailant, and then guarding the body until the eventual arrival of the police. What about a Victoria Cross for our brave Bertie? "What's this eventual arrival of the police?" Gillard said. "We had a CSI officer there within 1 minute. Claire rested a hand on his shoulder. "Craig, this is just froth. Don't take it personally. We're nearly there, aren't we? All the evidence is building up." "Not quite enough." Gillard looked at his watch. It was 5:53 p.m. and there were no results from the lab. "I'll ring them to see what the hold-up is." The detective rang and his call transferred automatically to the out-of-hours extension. He left a message, but knew then that with only a few minutes left to charge or release Jason Waddington, he had no alternative. "OK, Claire, no results on the DNA, but let's charge him anyway." Chapter 9. Friday. Gillard was accompanied by DC Colin Hodges for the 8 a.m. interview of James Waddington. If they could get a confession from him before he was taken to the magistrates at 10, that would lift all the pressure. If not, there was always a chance that the request for a remand would be denied. The custody sergeant had already warned them that Waddington was a bundle of fury. The moment the two detectives walked into the interview room, they could see for themselves that the prisoner had not been calmed down by another night in the cells. The swearing began as soon as Waddington clapped eyes on Gillard and went on for a couple of minutes as he called him every name under the sun. "You don't know who did it, so you're bloody fitting me up. It's an excuse for you lot being crap at your jobs." Waddington's finger jabbed towards the DCI in time with every word. The veins were standing out on his forehead and his teeth were bared. Gillard and Hodges tensed in case Waddington tried to have a go. He had form for that. "I'll advise you to calm down," said Gillard, as the duty solicitor, a dishevelled young man who looked like he had slept in his suit, wandered in with a large takeaway coffee and a battered briefcase. Waddington glowered at the detectives as they set up the tape recorder, answered the solicitor's questions, and ran through the introduction for the recording. Finally, Gillard began. "Jason, I'd like to ask you to account for all the time between your presence in the Feathers public house on Saturday and midday the following day." "I told you all that before. I got nothing to say." He folded his arms and looked with disdain at the solicitor sitting next to him. "He can't make me, can he?" "He can only ask. You don't have to reply," the brief said. "Fuck him right then." For the next 45 minutes, Waddington ignored every question, staring around the room as if bored. Finally, he said, "You got Michelle's statement, right? She told you I was there with her, didn't she?" Hodges leaned forward, caught Waddington's eye and shook his head slowly and sucked his teeth as if to say, "She stitched you up, mate." The duty solicitor, looking down at his phone, seemed to have missed the silent communication. Gillard knew it was a dangerous trick trying to sidestep the tape, as well as lying about the contents of a witness statement. "You're bullshitting me," Waddington said, but his face was freighted with anger at the apparent betrayal. The solicitor looked up, wondering what he had missed. Jason, I'm asking you again, can you explain why your DNA is on the lapel of Mrs. Roy's coat? The prisoner closed his eyes and wiped a hand over his face. His shoulders slumped. I didn't do it. You've got to believe me, I didn't